Shalom, children. Last week we began talking about some of the offerings Yahweh required from the people. We talked about a couple of them that dealt with animals. We learned about the animals that the Israelites were allowed to bring and not to bring, and the responsibilities of the priest and the people who brought the offerings. Today we are going to talk about another type of offering that the people were told to bring, called a grain offering. Do you know what grain is? Well, there are many types of grain, like wheat and corn. People take them and grind the little seeds into flour. The flour is what is used to make cakes, biscuits, and bread. I like these type of foods. Do you? Yahweh wanted his people to take the grain they grew and make very fine flour for any grain offering that was brought to him. Some of the rules, such as who could eat it, what to bring with it, and what not to bring with it, and how to cook it, are what we are going to talk about. Just like your parents and your teachers have rules, Yahweh had very specific rules that the adults were to follow when bringing a grain offering to the priest. Have you ever seen a fire pit or a fireplace? Do you know what happens to the wood that is used once it has all burned up? Well, it turns into ashes. And do you remember that we talked about the special clothes that were made for Aaron as the high priest? And do you remember that he and all the priests had special linen tunics and pants to wear? Well, Yahweh wanted them to wear these whilst they took the ashes from the altar and put them beside the altar. Then he wanted them to change clothes, take the ashes out of the camp and put them in a clean place. Even the ashes got special treatment. Yahweh certainly thinks of everything, doesn't he? Yahweh gave Moshe more instructions about the fire that the offerings were to be offered on. There was a special altar that was built, and the fire on the altar had to be kept burning all the time. When there was an animal that was offered for a burnt offering on the altar, the offering burned all night until the next morning. It's a good thing that Aaron had sons to help him with this job, as someone had to stay up all night and keep an eye on that fire. There were 3 things that were required to be included for the grain offering if it was uncooked. They were fine flour, oil, and frankincense. These were brought to the priest where they were burned on the altar, and whenever Yahweh would smell it, he called it a sweet fragrance. Sometimes your mother will wear perfume, or your father will wear cologne to smell good, and that is how Yahweh felt about the offerings that were brought to him. They were a nice smell. Yahweh also told them that they could bring a cooked grain offering. It had to have the 3 ingredients: fine flour, oil, and frankincense. He told them that the offering could not be baked with leavening. Leavening is what makes breads and cakes all nice and fluffy like this. Breads and cakes without leavening are flat. We call this kind of bread matzah. Have you ever eaten matzah? Maybe you have eaten it during Passover week, and that is coming up soon, isn't it? Yahweh also told them that he wanted salt to be included in the offering, but never any honey. There were also 3 different utensils the offerer could use to make the unleavened bread they brought to the priest. It could be cooked in a pot, it could be made on a griddle, and it could be baked in an oven. Now that does not look like an oven. It looks more like an anthill or a miniature volcano. Well, the ovens in the middle of the wilderness don't look like the ovens we have in our kitchens today. They build them on the ground with dirt and clay, and they baked their bread on the sides of it. I don't know about you, but just thinking about all of this bread has made me very hungry. Another rule was that part of your offering went onto the altar as a remembrance portion, for Yahweh to see your obedience, and the rest of it was for Aaron and his sons to eat, because their jobs didn't give them any time to grow and make their own food. Isn't Yahweh thoughtful to think of them? One last part of the grain offering was the first fruits. This is the very first harvest that you gather up. Yahweh wanted his people to show him thankfulness in remembering that everything we get is from him. So the first fruits had to be green heads of grain, not the ripe head, and this also was burned on the altar to Yahweh. The last rule for the priest was that they had to eat the grain offering in the courtyard, which is not inside the tabernacle. Moshe read to the people and the priests all that they had to do in very specific details. And although we do not do those things now, we still want to learn about them. After all, Yahweh took the time to tell Moshe about these things, and they were written down in the scriptures, so we should take the time to learn about them. Well, children, we have come to the end of our story for today. So we will see you next time for another exciting Torah portion. Shalom.
And they will know that we belong to him when